Scary telling.
Every day for the past year, I've seen the same dog sitting at my gate, watching me as I leave for work in the morning and come back at night. It's a medium-sized black and white mutt with big brown eyes, and it never fails to be there, rain or shine. At first, I thought it was just a stray dog looking for scraps, but soon enough, I realized it was waiting for me. I'm not sure why, but I grew attached to the dog. It was comforting to know that there was someone, even a four-legged friend, waiting for me when I returned home. I started to leave out some food and water for the dog, and soon enough, it became a daily routine for me. One day, as I was getting ready to leave for work, I noticed that the dog was acting differently. It was barking loudly and circling around me, almost as if it was trying to warn me of something. I didn't pay much attention to it, thinking that it was just having an off day. As I left for work that day, I noticed that the dog was still barking and growling, and it wouldn't stop following me. It was strange behavior, but I tried to ignore it and focus on my day. When I returned home that evening, the dog was still waiting for me, but it wasn't alone. There was a woman standing next to it, and she looked familiar. It took me a moment to realize that she was the previous owner of the house, the one who had sold it to me. "Hello," I greeted her warily. "Is there something I can help you with?" The woman just stared at me for a moment before speaking. "I see you've been taking care of my dog," she said, gesturing to the black and white mutt. "Yes, I have," I replied, still unsure of why she was there. "You know, my husband was killed in this house. He was murdered, and the killer was never caught," she continued, her voice trembling. "That dog was his. He loved that dog more than anything else in the world." I listened in horror as the woman recounted the details of her husband's death. Apparently, he was killed in the very room that I now use as my bedroom. She told me that the dog had been with him at the time and had witnessed the murder. Afterward, it had run out of the house and had never been seen again. Until now. As she finished her story, the dog came over and licked her hand. The woman smiled sadly and turned to leave, but not before saying, "That dog can still smell my husband's blood on your hands." I stood there, frozen in terror, as the woman and the dog walked away. It wasn't until they were out of sight that I realized that my hands were indeed stained with blood. I had been so preoccupied with work that day that I had forgotten to wash the blood off from a cut on my hand. From that day on, the dog's behavior changed. It no longer waited at the gate for me, and it no longer barked or growled. Instead, it would just sit quietly and stare at me, almost as if it was waiting for something. And every night, as I tried to sleep, I could hear the faint sound of barking and howling coming from the direction of the house. I tried to convince myself that it was just my imagination, but I knew deep down that it wasn't. I had unknowingly invited the ghost of a murder victim into my home, and now, it seemed like it was haunting me. I was hiking in Redwood Forest, a dense forest filled with towering trees, when I stumbled upon an abandoned cabin. It was hidden away from the main trail, and it looked like it hadn't been touched in years. As someone who loves exploring abandoned places, I couldn't resist taking a peek inside. The inside of the cabin was eerie. It was completely empty, except for a strange symbol etched into the wooden floor. It looked like some kind of pagan symbol, and it gave me a chill down my spine. As I turned to leave, I heard a faint whisper behind me. It was so faint that I couldn't make out what it said. I shook it off, thinking it was just my imagination, and headed back down the trail. That's when things started to get strange. I began to hear footsteps behind me, but every time I turned around, there was no one there. The whispers grew louder, and I started to feel like I was being followed. One night, I decided to camp out in the forest. I set up my tent and started a fire. As I was cooking my dinner, I heard the footsteps again. This time, they were accompanied by a low growling sound. I stood up, ready to defend myself, but I couldn't see anything in the darkness. Suddenly, a gust of wind blew out my fire, plunging me into complete darkness. That's when I heard it. A blood-curdling scream coming from the direction of the abandoned cabin. I grabbed my flashlight and ran towards the sound, my heart pounding in my chest. When I reached the cabin, I saw a figure standing in the doorway. It was a woman dressed in a long white gown with long black hair. Her face was twisted in a snarl, and her eyes were glowing red. I tried to run, but my legs wouldn't move. I was frozen in place, watching in horror as the woman floated towards me. She reached out and touched my face with her cold, clammy hand. That's when I blacked out. When I woke up, I was lying in a hospital bed. The doctors told me I had been found unconscious in the forest, covered in blood. I've been scrubbing my hands non-stop for weeks. The blood just won't come off. Every time I close my eyes, I see that woman's face, twisted in a snarl. I know now that I should never have gone into Redwood Forest, and I pray that no one else makes the same mistake. I woke up in a cold sweat, panting heavily. I checked my clock, and it read 3:15. I sighed in relief, knowing that it was just a nightmare. In my dream, I had been chased by a rotting corpse that kept trying to grab me with its bony fingers. I tried to calm myself down, but then I heard a creaking sound. I turned my head towards my closet, and to my horror, I saw the door slowly creaking open. I froze, feeling a chill run down my spine. I didn't know what to do, but I knew that I had to be brave. I slowly got out of bed, taking baby steps towards the closet. As I approached, the door creaked louder, and I could feel my heart racing faster and faster. I reached for the handle and flung the door open. At first, I saw nothing but darkness. But then, I saw something move in the corner of my eye. I turned my head, and there, standing in front of me, was the same rotting corpse from my nightmare. Its eyes were black and empty, and its skin was gray and peeling off. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. The corpse lunged towards me, grabbing me by the throat with its bony fingers. I could feel its cold, dead breath on my face, and I knew that I was going to die. But then, something strange happened. The corpse let go of my throat, and it started to fade away into thin air. I was confused and scared, but relieved that it was over. The next day, I couldn't shake off the feeling that something was watching me. Every time I turned my head, I felt like I was being followed. I tried to ignore it, but it was always there, lurking in the shadows. One night, I was watching TV when I heard a whisper in my ear. It said, "I'm still here." I turned around, but no one was there. I thought it was just my imagination playing tricks on me, but then I saw the rotting corpse again. It was standing right in front of me, its eyes staring into mine. I tried to run, but it grabbed me by the arm, pulling me towards it. It whispered in my ear again, "You can't escape me." I screamed for help, but no one came. I was trapped, and I knew that I was going to die. But then, I remembered something that my grandma had told me when I was little. She said that ghosts couldn't harm you if you stood your ground and faced them head on. So, I took a deep breath, turned around, and looked the ghost straight in the eyes. For a moment, nothing happened. But then, the ghost started to fade away again, just like before. This time, it didn't come back. I still don't know what the ghost wanted or why it chose me. But I learned that sometimes, you have to be brave and face your fears, even if it means confronting the supernatural. It started with a feeling of unease, a nagging sensation that something was off. At first, I brushed it off as my overactive imagination. But as the days went on, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. One night, as I was lying in bed, I saw it. A face, staring at me from outside my third-story window. I froze in terror, unable to move or scream. The face was pale, almost translucent, with sunken eyes and a twisted smile. It looked like something out of a horror movie. I tried to look away, but my eyes were drawn back to the window, as if I was under some kind of spell. The face stayed there for what felt like an eternity, until finally, it disappeared. I was left alone in the darkness, trembling with fear. The next day, I went to the police. They searched the area outside my window but found nothing. They chalked it up to a prank or a hallucination, but I knew what I saw was real. Days turned into weeks, and I started to feel like I was losing my mind. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, couldn't focus on anything other than the face in the window. One day, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I set up a camera outside my window, hoping to catch a glimpse of the face again. I waited for hours, but nothing happened. As I was about to give up, I heard a faint tapping on the glass. I turned to look, and there it was again. The face, staring at me with those sunken eyes and twisted smile. I watched in horror as the face started to distort and morph, changing into something even more terrifying. Its eyes turned black, and its smile grew wider and more menacing. That's when I realized the truth. The face wasn't just some random entity outside my window. It was a manifestation of my own fears and anxieties, a physical embodiment of the darkness within me. I tried to run, but I couldn't escape it. The face followed me everywhere, haunting me at every turn. It consumed me, body and soul, until I was nothing but a shell of my former self. In the end, I had no choice but to face my fears head-on. I had to confront the darkness within me and find a way to overcome it. It wasn't easy, but with time and effort, I was able to banish the face from my mind. I learned to accept my fears and use them as a source of strength rather than weakness. Now, whenever I feel that sense of unease creeping in, I remind myself that the face in the window was never real. It was just a reflection of the fears I held inside. And with that knowledge, I am able to face anything that comes my way. I was exhausted from a long day at work, so I crawled into bed and closed my eyes, hoping to get some much-needed rest. But as soon as I drifted off to sleep, I felt something cold and bony caress my body. At first, I thought it was just a strange dream, but then I realized that it was all too real. I tried to open my eyes and scream, but I couldn't move a muscle. I was paralyzed, trapped in my own body while the thing touched me all over. It had a cold, musty smell, and I could feel its breath on my face. I prayed that it was just my imagination, but deep down, I knew that it wasn't. I was too scared to move, too afraid to even breathe. The thing continued to touch me, its fingers cold as ice. Suddenly, it stopped. I could hear it moving away from me, its footsteps echoing in the darkness. I lay there, still paralyzed, listening to the sound of its footsteps until they faded away completely. The next morning, I tried to convince myself that it was just a bad dream. But when I looked in the mirror, I saw bruises all over my body, as if someone had been touching me aggressively. I knew that something was wrong, but I didn't know what to do. Days passed, and every night, I felt the cold, bony fingers touching me. I was too scared to move, too afraid to tell anyone. I felt like I was losing my mind. One night, I decided to stay up and wait for the thing to come back. I wanted to confront it, to show it that I wasn't afraid anymore. I waited and waited, but nothing happened. I started to feel like maybe it was all in my head, that I was just imagining things. But then, I heard a strange noise coming from the closet. It sounded like something was scratching at the door. I got up, heart pounding, and slowly opened the closet. At first, I didn't see anything. But then, I saw something move in the corner of my eye. It was a dark figure, with bony fingers and a cold, lifeless face. It was the thing that had been touching me all along. I screamed and tried to run, but it grabbed me by the ankle, pulling me back. I kicked and struggled, trying to break free, but it was too strong. It dragged me into the closet, into a world of darkness and pain. I don't remember what happened after that. All I know is that I woke up in the hospital, with no memory of how I got there. The doctors told me that I had been found in my closet, covered in bruises and scratches. I knew that it wasn't over, that the thing was still out there, waiting for me. But this time, I was ready. I armed myself with holy water, salt, and a cross, and waited for it to come back. And it did. But this time, I fought back. I sprayed it with holy water, threw salt at it, and held up the cross. It screamed and howled, its bony fingers clawing at the air, but I didn't back down. I faced it head on, and eventually, it faded away into nothingness. I still don't know what the thing was, or why it chose me. But I learned that sometimes, the only way to conquer your fears is to face them head on, no matter how terrifying they may be.